Now, a new round of diplomatic consultations in Cairo has placed the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea back at the centre of international attention, highlighting growing efforts to coordinate responses to one of the world's most strategically important regions. Now, the meetings brought together officials from Egypt, Somalia, Eritrea and a senior United States envoy, reflecting increasing concern over regional security, maritime stability and changing geopolitical dynamics. Now, although officials have released few details, the consultations suggest that security challenges across the Horn of Africa are becoming increasingly interconnected. Maritime security, political influence, trade routes and regional competition are now being viewed as part of the same strategic picture. For Egypt, this diplomatic effort represents a broader shift in its regional strategy. While Cairo's relationship with Ethiopia has long focused on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, its concerns now extend beyond the water security. Ethiopia's expanding regional influence, its growing interest in maritime access and evolving partnerships across the Horn of Africa have become central to Egypt's national security calculations. Now, the Red Sea has also become increasingly important, not only because it provides access to the Suez Canal, because it remains one of the world's busiest maritime trade corridors. Well, to better understand why diplomacy in the Horn of Africa is becoming increasingly significant, here's our special report now.
The Horn of Africa has always occupied an important position on the global map. Bordering both the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, the region sits along one of the world's busiest maritime corridors, connecting Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Every year, thousands of commercial vessels carrying energy supplies, manufactured goods, and food shipments pass through these waters. As a result, instability in the region can have consequences far beyond Africa. One of the biggest issues shaping today's diplomacy is Ethiopia's effort to expand its maritime access. Despite being one of Africa's fastest growing economies and its second most populous country, Ethiopia has been landlocked since Eritrea became independent in the early 1990s. For years, Ethiopian leaders have argued that improved access to ports is essential for reducing transport costs, boosting trade, and supporting long-term economic development. However, those ambitions have also become a source of regional tension. Somalia has repeatedly stated that any arrangement involving access to the sea must fully respect its sovereignty and territorial integrity. That disagreement has transformed maritime access into one of the Horn of Africa's most sensitive diplomatic issues. VO. The region's security concerns extend well beyond individual disputes. The Red Sea has become increasingly vulnerable to disruptions affecting international shipping, while governments continue to confront terrorism, piracy, and political instability across several neighboring states. Competition over ports, infrastructure investment, and strategic partnerships has added another layer of complexity. Rather than addressing these challenges separately, regional governments are increasingly treating them as interconnected security issues. International powers are also paying close attention. For the United States, stability in the Horn of Africa is closely linked to protecting global commerce, supporting regional security, and maintaining freedom of navigation through one of the world's most important maritime routes. The presence of a senior U.S. envoy during the Cairo consultations reflects Washington's continuing interest in preventing further instability while encouraging greater regional cooperation. Analysts say the recent consultations do not represent the creation of a new political or military alliance. Instead, they reflect an effort to improve communication among countries facing many of the same strategic challenges. Another important consideration is Sudan. Although Sudan was not directly involved in the Cairo discussions, its ongoing conflict continues to influence the wider regional security environment. Its location between North Africa, the Horn of Africa, and the Red Sea makes developments there an important part of broader strategic calculations. Experts believe the success of future diplomacy will depend on whether countries can strengthen cooperation while managing competing national interests. As geopolitical competition continues to evolve, the Horn of Africa is likely to remain one of the world's most closely watched strategic regions.
The Cairo consultations also highlight how regional diplomacy is evolving. Rather than focusing on a single issue, governments are now attempting to manage multiple challenges simultaneously, from maritime security and economic interests to political influence and regional stability. For Egypt, maintaining close engagement with Somalia and Eritrea forms part of a broader effort to preserve influence as strategic competition across the Horn of Africa continues to intensify. Now, for Washington, the consultations reinforce long-standing priorities of regional stability, counter-terrorism cooperation and protecting international shipping routes that are vital to the global economy. While no major agreements were announced, analysts say the significance of the meetings lie in the messages they send. The Horn of Africa and the Red Sea are increasingly being treated as one interconnected strategic arena where developments in one country can quickly affect the whole wider region. Whether these diplomatic consultations ultimately lead to stronger cooperation or simply manage growing regional competition remains to be seen. But they clearly demonstrate that the Horn of Africa has become a central focus for both the regional and international diplomacy, with implications extending well beyond the African continent. Well, to discuss these latest developments, we're joined by our guest, Mr. Ahmed Buhari, who is a political analyst from Africa. Mr. Buhari, thank you and welcome back once again to Perspectiva. So how do the recent consultations in Cairo tell us about the changing balance of power in the Horn of Africa and also the Red Sea?
Yes, thank you for having me. These consultations reflect our recognition that indeed the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea have become a central part of the global geopolitics. What we are seeing now doesn't necessarily mean any bloc trying to exert dominance or show superiority, but rather I think it's a shift towards greater strategic, you can call it competition and cooperation amongst regional states in the area. So I think it's time for countries to increasingly be aware of the fact that security, trade, and energy routes have to be properly discussed and see how they can collaborate and cooperate amongst themselves to ensure that the Cairo initiative is there to demonstrate regional diplomacy rather than be always, lagging behind and trying to work from the back with states seeking dialogue before crisis escalates. So I'm excited that this is happening, and I'm also glad with the trend that it's beginning to follow because I'm not seeing any particular state trying to show superiority, but rather trying to work with member countries and say, you know what, we need to have this dialogue. This initiative has been put in place to demonstrate the need for us to have a diplomacy that can help us be proactive so that we do not fall into crisis that we will not be able to manage in future.
And Mr. Buhari, why has Egypt expanded its focus beyond the grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam to Ethiopia's broader regional influence and maritime ambitions?
Absolutely. Egypt's concerns have naturally evolved because regional dynamics has evolved. Clearly, we can see all that is happening from the Strait of Hormuz and tensions across the globe. While the Nile remains a vital national interest, Ethiopia's growing diplomatic engagement and its pursuit for maritime access introduces a broader geopolitical consideration. And that is why Egypt is therefore looking at a wider strategic picture. At a time like this development in the Horn of Africa may affect regional security, economic connectivity. Also, you have to look at the balance of influence. This should be understood as less as this should not be taken from a perspective of confrontation, but rather a more strategic effort that would anticipate a long-term strategic changes in the region, in my opinion.
Well, sir, how has Ethiopia's pursuit of access to the sea reshaped relations with neighbouring countries, particularly Somalia and Eritrea?
Well, Ethiopia's search for reliable sea access is understandable, judging from the fact that it's a landlocked country. so its economic size and its landlocked nature requires it to raise these concerns and try to strategically introduce itself into conversations like this. However, the manner in which such ambitions and pursuits will be carried out is very important. I also think that any pre-position from the Ethiopian sovereignty, our existing agreements may be challenged naturally and create tensions. We have seen over the time such opportunities for negotiations coming up from places like Ethiopia. I think Ethiopia is strategic in this conversation, and I think for its survival, it would have to position itself in all of this that is going on in the Horn of Africa at a moment like this.
And so the United States was also represented at these consultations by a senior envoy. Can you explain what interest does Washington have in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea today?
Well, we've all seen the United States and its hands in nearly everything, everywhere. The United States has long-standing strategic interest in the region. The Red Sea is one of the world's most important maritime corridors linking Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, as a matter of fact. So Washington definitely is concerned with maintaining freedom for navigation, countering terrorism, protecting global trade, and preventing instability that could have a wider international consequence. At a time like this, we've seen the United States recognize the sustainable security challenges or solutions, and ultimately this depends on strong partnerships and a Pan-African-led solution to help quell, or should I say, stabilize some of these situations.
And Mr. Bahari, the Horn of Africa is also increasingly described as a single strategic arena linking maritime security, trade and geopolitics. What are the key drivers behind this shift?
Well, the region can no longer be viewed through isolated national issues. Maritime trade, energy infrastructure, migration, terrorism, climate change, and great power competition are all interconnected, as we can see over the last couple of decades. So a disruption in one part of the Horn or the Red Sea quickly affects global shipping, food supply chains, and regional security. That interconnectedness is driving governments to adopt more integrated diplomatic and security approaches rather than coming back at the end of the day to think about what kind of resolution you want to put in place after a conflict must have already escalated.
And so do these Cairo consultations signal the emergence of a new regional security framework, or are they simply an effort to improve coordination among countries with shared concerns?
Well, I believe it is too early to describe this as a new security architecture. At this stage, it appears to be an important platform for consultations and confidence building. Judging from the fact that everybody is a bit tense as it stands right now. However, such initiatives can gradually evolve into more structured cooperation if they remain inclusive, transparent, and focused on common interests rather than the geopolitical rivalry. I believe that the success of all of this will depend largely on whether dialogue translates into practical mechanisms for conflict prevention, economic cooperation, and the collective security that we all desperately yearn for.
And finally, so looking ahead, what are the biggest obstacles to achieving lasting stability, I should say, in the Horn of Africa? And what role should regional organisations like the African Union play in that process?
Good question. Good question. So I think the greatest challenge remains unresolved political disputes, fragile state institutions, economic pressures, humanitarian crisis. We have things like the growing geopolitical competition. Lasting peace and that's the truth. Yeah, lasting peace cannot be achieved. We cannot achieve lasting peace if all of these areas are not properly, examined, x-rayed, and achieved through a proper consultation process where everybody will have to come to the table, believing that the reason for all of that is to arrive at a common ground where everybody would be successfully integrated into the conversation. So lasting peace cannot be achieved through a military solution as it is right now alone. It requires inclusive governance. It requires economic opportunity, regional cooperation, and sustainable diplomatic engagement. The African Union, as it is as a body, has a particular important role because African challenges are best addressed through African leadership, and the AU can provide natural platforms for dialogue, strengthen preventive diplomacy, and encourage solutions and respect through proper recognition of the sovereignty of these individual countries while promoting regional integration. International partners certainly have an important role to play, but they should complement each other, not replace the African-led initiatives with their own personal interests. That's how I view the situation.
Mr. Bahari, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it lots.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that is all for today's edition of Perspectiva. Our thanks go to our guests for sharing their views on the unpopularity of the Iran war in the United States and for shedding light on the strategic importance of the Horn of Africa. Please, for more stories and updates, follow us on social media or visit Asian One News TV. Thanks for watching. I'm Tom Philpot. We'll see you next time.